Well, Shabbat Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. Welcome to After's Heart Ministries. I'm Rabbi Q. Do you know the difference between signal and noise in your life, and do you know what purpose that it has? That and more as we begin to move into a new season of learnings and a new season of revelation. So first of all, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about the idea behind signal versus noise. The premise that we are working with is basically one in which there is a um, system of information always available to us. Some people have called it the law of correspondence. And of course, within the Hermetic order, it was actually called that, the law of correspondence. Paul says in Romans chapter 1, verse 19, that which has been made tells us about the invisible attributes of the divine nature and eternal power. And then again, in another place, we have um, evidence of there being some description about the supernatural versus the natural, in that you see it in the natural. That's actually how the supernatural is. Now, there are a number of ways that we could be descriptive in this information. There are a number of ways in which we could actually communicate this. But the best way that I want you to understand it is that we will work with models that have been established by science. And I know some of you are really uncomfortable with that, especially when it comes to things like evolution and young earth and things like that. But we will work with science to actually see things in the supernatural. And we've done this over and over and over again. Well, one of the things that we have done and learned in the cycles teachings, which you could go back and watch those videos, cycles part 1 through I think it's 13, and you can see that there is actually a pattern in nature, and it appears to be a pattern designed by the divine. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't believe in the divine, you need to at least accept that there seems to be within the realm of height, width, depth, time, or space-time, some sort of pattern that, if you line up with it, seems to flow better than without it. Now, I know that somebody's going to go, somebody who does not believe in God, who may be an atheist or perhaps an agnostic, they'll go, no, 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 no. You know what? Actually, truth be told, is there's nothing that proves that. Well, here's the problem. Number one is nobody's really set it up in a laboratory to test it. And truth be told is it probably couldn't be set up in a laboratory. Furthermore, it involves some sort of scalar energy or scalar measurement of 0 point energy, which we don't really have the devices to really detect yet. Tesla had it, and he knew of it, and he understood it better than I could ever explain it. But truth be told, is within that confine is an idea that when you fall into alignment with those sequences, those patterns, the pattern on the sunflower, etc., nature is operating in that. Your body is actually operating within that. It grows in that way. We've talked about the golden ratio. We've talked about the um, the patterns in nature. We've talked about the 137.5 versus the 42.5. I think we've even talked about, I don't know if we've actually talked about the correlation between Fibonacci and the rainbow, but just know that there's a lot of things that are just in a state of pattern, and there's a lot of things that are in a state of cycle, including you, except for your conscious thought, or so you think. And I'm going to propose to you that that's a very, very important thing. I'm going to propose to you that what we don't realize about how we think is important, but I'm going to propose that we also are voluntarily blind to the patterns when it comes to our conscious interaction with this world of patterns. Now, the cycles teaching is at one level, but there's another level that we need to go to. And the principle is that we need to accept that there is within science proof of a space-time cycle. Now, we don't completely know what it means, and we don't know completely what it does, but in the realm of quantum mechanics, we know that there is a lot that's going on behind the scenes that is not yet quite explainable. And furthermore, we need to accept, and then this is coming from a lot of pretty high level physicists, okay? And I want you to know it's actually the theoretical physicists who are really starting to admit intelligent design and that they don't know what they're working with when it comes to quantum mechanics. Now, in times past, as I have given these messages, there's been a lot of challenge. There's said, oh, well, you know what? No, it's actually this way. And I'm just going to say that there's a lot of friction between what is considered fact right now versus what is actually exists. And over time, you can learn from not only from anthropology, but you can also learn from this current civilization and its history that we've been wrong a lot of the time. So it might be time to open your mind. It might be time to stop doing what you normally do, which is, oh, let me go fact check. And I'm not saying don't fact check me. What I'm saying is, are you sure you know that those facts are true? Because one of the things I want you to think about is optics. I want you to think about what would benefit a scientific community to start to prove things like the law of attraction. What would they benefit from? And what would the people at large benefit from? What if we were to prove something about the crown which you wear in terms of a kingship or a kingdom under the rulership of a governing body, whether it be a parliament, whether it be a monarchy, whether it be a presidency? The point I'm trying to make here is that I am not sure that you necessarily can trust what you read on Wikipedia or what you can hear on the news, right? So perhaps maybe it is important that within those confines that you begin to allow an open mind to the possibility that something might be outside of your understanding. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I want you to understand that time is actually three-dimensional. I'm not going to prove that to you today, but I am going to say that what you need to think about is how the universe actually really operates, because I can tell you it's not flat, but it is also not spherical. Okay? Okay. In fact, we have proof through the James Webb Telescope that it is toroidal. Okay? Now, there's plenty that we could know about the torus, and I can tell you energy vortexes and vortex mathematics and all those other things have their place. But more importantly, what we need to do today is understand how space-time plays a role in your reality. Now, here's the part that's important. You think when I say your reality, I'm talking about what you can see, what you can hear, and what you can touch. But you need to know that that's just a simplified version of what's really in front of you. Now, in the moment, I'm going to illustrate that on the board. And the way that I'm going to do that is going to be a little bit uncomfortable for you because the reality of who and what you really are is a very difficult thing to accept because of a number of small, minor issues that seem to interrupt that thought process. Now, I know I've just been speaking like in total enigma and everything else. So let me go ahead and jump on the board and see if I can illustrate this a little bit more effectively. So one of the things that we probably need to start with is the concept of well, so it's kind of like that Russian doll set that they make where you have one nested within the other. Let's go ahead and work through some colors here. Let's do that. Let's go we'll try to keep them a little bit contrasting so they can kind of basically they can work within each other. And I want to draw this pretty exact. So we're going to kind of try to I'm going to take a little bit of time to illustrate this. Oh yeah, see, I already messed up here. There we go. Okay. Yeah. But nope, that's still not right. Okay. I know what I got to do here. There we go. Yes. There we go. Okay. And then let's do another contrasting color. Nope, that's not right either. Sorry, this is hard to illustrate. This is really hard to illustrate. Okay, so here's what I want you to think about. Let me go ahead and switch back here for just a moment. And I know this is kind of funky. The colors is kind of blended together here, but you could see these nested bowls, right? So the way I want you to think about this is that this is actually the true self, okay? And each level here is a threshold, okay? Each one of these levels is a threshold. And you need to know that within that threshold, there is some other things going on. And there's man, I know this is going to get probably a little bit messy. I knew that was going to happen. So let me just go ahead and use this color, and I'll just color this in really quick. And you guys can ignore the purple and the yellow for a moment because they are just proof of the nesting, okay? But I want you to see that this is more like how full the bowl is, okay? All right, so let me go ahead and undo that last thing. So what I was wanting you to see is that the bowl has like this much space, right? In fact, let me go back really quick to let's put that back in for just a moment and really kind of illustrate this correctly. Okay. So if you were to fill a bowl with this much stuff, let's say ingredients, whatever, then that would all rest there. And that would be because of what we call hydrostatic equilibrium and gravity and all that. Now you could tilt the bowl, or you could, even if it was like say, I don't know, something that was a little bit more structural like powder or whatever, you could probably end up with a pile more to this side, right? And the whole idea here is that would be kind of a little bit outside of what we're wanting to talk about. But that would be the concept of something a little bit more structural. And for those of you who understand structure would know that this is actually a very important variable within that understanding. However, for those of you who still need to just understand hydrostatic equilibrium, the best way I could put it to you is if you filled this bowl with liquid, liquid follows the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance is the bottom of the bowl. The bowl itself is resisting, which is also structure. And so, for those of you who understand structure, you probably have started to gain an understanding of what we're about to talk about. However, for those of you who are still learning these things and trying to understand these things, we need to definitely give the green bowl its precedence. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that mess. And just for really quick, we're going to go ahead and get rid of this, and we're going to go ahead and get rid of this. And the reason that we're going to do that, let's get rid of these as well. The reason that we're going to do that is because this little green bowl, in fact, let's get rid of this too, okay? This little green bowl is actually you at this moment, okay? Let's go back to the board now. So in terms of that, let's go ahead and illustrate that a little bit here. So this is you. And I can even say this is me. Okay, this is any one of us. And the reason for that is because this is actually three-dimensional, but we're not going to get into that. We might not even get into that today, but we're not going to get into it right now. We're going to keep this as two-dimensional as possible right now. But the principle is that the way we think about our lives is that everything that's in this bowl is the only thing that exists. Okay. And a big piece of that puzzle is definitely about how full your bowl is. Okay. And so what we don't think about and what we don't understand is that that part of the bowl being full is all we know, all we think about, okay? So in terms of your reality, you have a kind of a space in which you operate. Now, when we are looking at animals, a lot of times we'll look at what their spread is, in an environment. For example, how far does a certain type of animal travel? Especially when we're dealing with endangered species. When we're dealing with endangered species, we usually try to trap them, radio tag them, and track them. And we'll notice that they only travel a certain length in any given radius. Okay. Well, this is how I want you to think about your life. Generally speaking, you live in a very specific place. Now, there's some of you who will just totally break this model, and so I'm not really talking about you. But the premise is that there is basically a radius of miles in which you exist. The grocery store is somewhere within those radius. Your children's school, if you have children, is within those radius. Your job is within that radius, unless, of course, you work online, then you broke my model. But the premise is that we kind of still have this place of our circle of influence. And when I say that, what I mean is that that's kind of our domain. And for those of you, I a lot of times I will encounter somebody who's a Colorado native, right? Or better yet, somebody who grew up in Aspen like I did, who knows the local scene of Aspen and not the tourist scene of Aspen. Or maybe perhaps they know about those secret lakes up behind Basalt that are really cool. Or perhaps maybe somebody knows about Rudai Reservoir, right? But all that is still just kind of a domain, and then you're like, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know that little fishing spot over there. That's your domain, right? That's your spot. That's your place in this universe, in this reality. And for you to think about outside this bowl starts to get really stressful. And here's the intrigue is within that, there's even micro bowls in your life. Okay. And so what's crazy is I can actually draw another bowl here. I could actually draw another bowl. And when I do that, here, this is an easier illustration. In fact, let me even help you guys out a little bit more. There we go. That's kind of more how your reality seems to you. Now, let's put this back in, right? Let's put these back in real quick. Come on, let me go back. There you go. Oh man, it's not gonna let me go back. Okay, I guess I'm gonna have to redraw them, but you know what? Let's go ahead and actually, now let's leave the green bowl. I'm gonna have to redraw them. However, before I do, I am going to do that scaling again. I am gonna bring that up here where it's big, because this is your reality, right? This is where you operate. These are the things that you operate within. But what I want you to know is that, for example, let's draw our bigger bowl real quick. So that line is way outside of your sight, right? You can't even see the whole bowl. You can't, right? We may be able to say, I don't know, see the purple bowl, which was more like probably about here, right? But truth be told is that wasn't even really all that visible. But the yellow bowl, I think, was the next bowl. Let me think about it a second. I think it was the yellow bowl, or maybe the yellow bowl was the bigger one. Let's go ahead and do the purple bowl. Sorry about that. So here's the purple bowl, right? And we could see that. Theoretically, we could see that, I should say. Okay. And here's the thing is this here is the threshold. Okay. So there's our threshold. And so the principle is let's just work on this real quick and think of it in this way. Anything that is within let me see. I'm going to say we will actually use this color for this pen. So anything that's within this line, not this line, okay, is actually the threshold of our reality. Anything that goes beyond that, we consider, oops, I did that. Get the correct pin here. Okay. So anything beyond that, we call something. We call it super. And then I'm just going to put a dash here. Natural. Now we've concluded that natural has to do with anything that is actually, for lack of better words, able to be proven by sight, sound, and touch. And we won't get into taste and smell, but the whole idea here is that it has to be tangible. But then we have this theory outside here. Like, for example, let's say that you are an atheist. So we're just going to go ahead and write atheist here real quick. Now, there's a reason why I am picking on the atheists today, and it's because I don't pick on you enough. Okay, but then out here we have things like quantum theory, right? Nothing we can prove in a laboratory, nothing we can prove mathematically. It's just kind of something that just really rests very comfortably within the confines of we can't see it, we don't know it, but here's the evidence of it, right? So it's got to be something there. One of the places where we do this is with black holes, okay? And one of the places where we do this is with dark matter. This is a theory. There's not a whole lot to actually prove it. But what's interesting about this is that yes, we're picking on the atheists here, but I'm about to really get crazy here. But the premise is that what we're working with here is supernatural in the sense that it is not something that's tangible at this time. Now you say, wait a minute, quantum mechanics is not supernatural. It's not supernatural because what we define as supernatural would be some sort of paranormal, Oh, there's another compound word, right? Para being what? Next to or outside of normal. Oh, well, who's going to define normal for us? Well, I guess one could argue that normal is only what is in the confines of your bowl, right? Normal is your ability to go to work and your car doesn't break down. Normal is when your family gets along, even though that they have hardships. No, wait a minute. Is that normal? Maybe it's normal to not have hardships. You see, normal is so ridiculously subjective that paranormal is what the scientists have given a label to anything that would be more mythological than real, right? Okay, so we're going to stop picking on the atheists for a moment and we're going to go pick on some other people, okay? Nope, that's not actually what I want to do. I want to just get rid of atheists there because they are a great example, but they are not the exception. And what I mean by that is they're not the only ones in this boat. All right, so now our next group, let's just go ahead and put them out there. And I know this is going to definitely get me in trouble with some people, but here we go. So Christians, they have a set of beliefs and they have a way of thinking and they have a lifestyle that they live and an action that they perform and they have a mindset that they dwell within. And that particular mindset that they dwell within and that action that they perform and all of those other things are based upon this particular threshold right here called heaven. And kind of up here is also God. Okay? All right, and we'll just go ahead and put a dash right there to kind of connect those two, heaven and God. And contextually, they've put a lot of focus on Christ within this realm, right? They have to evangelize. They have to follow certain rules, tenets, bylaws, etc. Confessions, creeds, right? And so when we are working with a model like this, one of the things I want you to think about is as we cross that threshold, we start to move into things that are not of this world. And what I want you to think about is those things that are not of this world are more important than the things of this world. Okay? And I want you to understand, or at least I want you to remember something very, very important that you may have forgotten is that there's another huge, in fact, we need to go bigger than that. There is another huge, huge bowl. Okay. And so the way that I want you to think about this is that if there's this other huge bowl, then there's something beyond heaven and God. And now, before you know what, I actually don't care whether you leave and not watch this. I'm more interested in the people who actually want the insight here. So, in principle, before you freak out and start to lose the context, because there's people who will tune out once I start to go this direction. Those people who are staying and listening, here's the deal. I'm not saying that there's something bigger than God. I'm saying that God, as you understand him, is limited by your own mind at this level. Okay? So let's add one more group to the list. And the reason why we need to add these guys is because they actually have something that the Christians don't. Okay. Let's see here. So just give me a second. I'm making sure I get everything erased correctly. And there, and there. Okay. All right. And so we still have our bowl. We still have our reality, but we're just kind of changing the grouping here, right? The grouping. And so this time we are going to go this direction. Okay. And here's the intrigue is the supernatural aspect for the Jews is actually something extremely unattainable. And what I mean by that is whereas the Christians believe that they have full access to heaven, the Jews don't. And I'm going to share something very private with you. I'm not saying that Yeshua was completely in adherence to their doctrine, but Jews of the first century did not either. Okay? So either Christ brought something so extremely new to the picture that all of a sudden the Christians have access to something that Israel never had access to, or Christians have created a construct that is not actually true. Now, I can tell you, it might be a balance of both, okay? But let's go back to our board. All right. So, anyways, in terms of this, the Jews believe in a world to come. We can go with that. World. One of these days I'll spell it right. World to come. Okay. And I notice I'm not putting the hyphens in this time because this is actually a title. Okay. World to come. Now, and in the Hebrew, we call this the Olam Haba. Okay. But I want you to notice that that's still at this threshold. Okay. That's still at that threshold. So we could go from the natural to the supernatural. We can go from the common world to the world to come. We can go from what is seen and heard and felt to what is not seen, heard, and felt, and is definitely outside of anything we could prove in a laboratory. So we could put the Jews, the Christians, and we could put let me see if I can write a little clearer. Jeez. It's hard to write with these pens. Christians. Okay. And then we can put the atheists in here. Right? And what's interesting is they all kind of have the same threshold between what we would call the supernatural and the natural. Now, the intrigue behind this is that even though there is this bigger bowl, which I'm going to reveal to you in a minute, this purple bowl, where the way that people actually see this, let me go ahead and just really quick get this out of here. And the way that people actually focus their energy is in this way right here. Meaning what? They don't know of this upper threshold. They know there's a threshold right here, right? But what they don't know is all of this stuff over here, okay? All right, so now what we need to do is we need to ask a few questions. The first question that we need to ask is what would this over here be? Okay, so let's chat about this for a minute. In Hebrew thought, and this is ancient Hebrew thought, what you are facing is what you have seen and can currently see, which means the past and the present, because you've already seen it, is what's in front of you. And what you cannot see, which is back here where you cannot see anything, that is actually the future. Now, I know that's a little bit off from how we think, but what I want you to consider is that they only will walk a path that they've seen, right? They will only go down a direction that they've seen. And there's something very powerful about that. It has to do with entering a season before its time. It has to do with the rolling of the scroll. Remember, we roll the scroll, and when we do, we arrive at the section, and then we close the scroll. So when it says in Luke chapter 4, verse 16, I believe it is, where it says, as was according to his custom, he went into the synagogue, and having been invited to read and given the scroll, he opens it to the place. That doesn't mean that he rolled the Isaiah scroll for, 60 some lamb bellies, because that's actually what they used to write the Torah on. But the premise is that they were actually that he was actually just opening the scroll to the part that had already been rolled to, because of the Haftarah portion, which is the secondary portion to the parasha, which will always correspond to the subject matter of the Torah portion and that part in the prophets. So in principle, when it says that as was his custom, he went in, blah, 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 and he opens the scroll, all I want you to think is that he was not entering a season before its time, to the extent, this is important, to the extent that he says today, these verses are being fulfilled in your ears. Time. Now, the reason why this is so important is because when we start to get into the concept of time, some very important things come forward. Number one, the verses in the Bible indicate that it can be hastened. Okay, that's one. In fact, in some places it warns you not to hasten. Number two, it can be delayed, and that's important as well. Now, a signal analyst will take time to actually listen to all the different frequencies, all the different possible areas where there could be radio signal, because their job is to determine if there is any information out there that would indicate that there's a message being communicated, or there's information being communicated, possibly even espionage information, like somebody spying on that particular organization, and now is communicating outward from there and giving information to what would be considered an opponent, competition, or an enemy, right? So I want you to think about signal as the actual thing that you should be looking for, versus noise, which is all the extra stuff in the radio space. Now, what you need to realize is that when we are working with science, oftentimes the way that we have discovered things is through signal. And I know that a lot of people are going to lose touch here, because you think of signal as a radio wave, but the truth is it's just information present within a bunch of things that are not important. And so in business, when we're dealing with signal and noise, we can have a tendency to actually concentrate on things that don't necessarily help the business. That's noise. Signal is when we have feedback from systems, and that feedback lets us know something important about the business. And you have to sift through all the information coming in to find the signal. But I propose to you that one of the issues that exists within our reality is that we have signal and we don't respond correctly to it. I'm going to explain here in a minute. So what I want you to think about is that there is a secondary threshold on this set. Let me show you. Okay, so we already have this little tiny bowl within this whole grouping. And this little tiny bowl is actually really important. And I told you already that we can actually have even smaller, we can actually have even smaller bowls. Okay? In other words, there are things that we would hyper focus on. In fact, let me go ahead and remove our friend here, and we will relabel this particular bowl as focus. And what's interesting is when that focus is inappropriately prioritized, something amazing happens, and that is, watch this. Let's see what we need to do here. We need to get rid of some stuff because I don't want to be all chaotic with my notations today, because this is really important stuff. I don't want you to lose me here. So let's see, we'll get rid of this, let's get rid of these. Right. Can I get, nope, I can't. All right. I won't get rid of the dotted lines. All right, so I could probably get rid of this blue line though. Yeah. Okay. So here's the interesting thing about this is that this is actually something that happens to people a lot. And that is, oh, hold on. Let me switch to my pen here. Okay, there we go. That is that they will actually do this, which means what? Oh, this means that your actual circle of influence, your reality, everything that exists within your simple height, width, depth, time information is so disconnected that the only thing you know, and here's the amazing thing about this, is that the only thing you know is actually a threshold here. Remember, the yellow one is your reality. In fact, let's go ahead and label that real quick. Let's label that so that we can really focus in on this. Okay. So the whole idea here, and this is important, is that all of a sudden what has happened is you have actually gone deeper inside of your reality. This is called a contraction. And the way that I want you to think about this is that something has taken your focus away from all of the rest of the things that are in your reality and potentially even important. And it takes some sort of break with that system. I'll explain what I mean by system here in a minute, but it takes some sort of break. We're going to go ahead and label this little bowl again so you can actually see where this focus has actually, what this focus has actually done, as opposed to what? Well, we know, number one of them would be heaven, right? Or the supernatural, or something outside, quantum mechanics, etc., that kind of thing. Scalar energy could be one of those things. That's completely out of the question because you're not even within your reality anymore. In principle, your threshold of belief was somewhere up here. But truth be told, is now your hyper focus is actually on something that is within the confines of a bigger picture that you can see right in front of you. You can see all this, you can feel all this, but this green bowl is actually your focus. And that blue line going up has eliminated any other relevant reality. Do you see this? Do you see that you can actually be so disconnected from your space that the focus of your life actually has become so narrowed that the actual reality itself doesn't exist anymore? Now, here's something really interesting that a lot of people don't realize or know, and that is that reality doesn't ask permission to exist. What does that mean? That means, and I need to get rid of some stuff here, but that means that let me get rid of all this. Let's see, we're going to get rid of that, that. And we're just going to go ahead and redraw this bowl real quick here. Okay. That means that the rest of what exists, including, let's go ahead and draw it in there, this big bad boy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so I know there were other concentric bowls, but we're just going to leave that red one and we're going to do this. Okay, and then we're going to do this. Okay, and then let's go ahead and let's put our yellow bowl back in, because that's our actual what we can see, we can hear, we can feel, we can touch. And here's the interesting thing about it is that is actually doing this as well. And what's interesting about all this is that, and let me go ahead and illustrate this line up, because remember, that's our focus. We have lost touch with the information over here. Okay. In fact, well, I would like to label these, but I don't want to really mess with that because I don't want to bias your mind. Okay, so now the principle is that all of these other realities are putting pressure upon the thresholds of the current reality. And that principle is basically something known as concealment. Now, what's interesting is that you actually are the one who created this. So this is created by you. Okay. That R doesn't need to be in there. Okay. Created by you. Boy, that's just horrible writing, but that's okay. I think you guys get it. So there's this pressure pushing against this threshold right here. Okay. And what that pressure is trying to do is assert itself as your reality. Now, let me explain this. Okay. Your hyper focus down here has created a threshold by which you will never attain to this reality. And what I mean by that is your focus has become so narrowed that heaven is not actually a part of the information that you no longer operate within. This reality right here is actually the only thing really threatening your focus. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. That means that you yourself have created a new vessel, as it were, but you yourself have created boundaries by which the rest of reality that you know actually can't be present. And so I want to go ahead and really, really dial this in for you in such a way as you will understand it better, okay? So I'm going to change the wording a little bit here, and I'm also going to label some other things, okay? But what I really, really want to dial in first is this, not that, this threshold right here, that threshold, okay? Because that particular threshold is not anything to do with the supernatural, but instead very important things. So let me explain. We're going to label some things here real quick. So I want you to see what's happened here. You have concealed the reality and you have created a threshold between you and those things as a result of this hyper focus. Okay. Now, what's important here is how these filters occur. First of all, you need to know that the first huge thing is that you are constantly going to experience that right there. That is probably going to be cognitive dissonance, conviction. If you're a Christian, you're going to say, I'm convicted. If you're a Jew, you're going to say, I feel guilty. And if you're an atheist, you're going to be like, there's something really uncomfortable here, but I don't know what it is, right? But the premise is that reality itself is trying to assert itself because there's something very specific that's going on. Now, what I want to do next is I want to illustrate for you a typical Hebrew lifestyle walk, okay? So here we have a trail, okay? And this particular trail is what we would call the only path, okay? So we'll go ahead and label it only path. Available. I think that's supposed to be an I. Never did claim to be a good speller. Available. Okay. So now, nope, it isn't. Now the concept that we're going to be working with is that this is kind of one of those things where there's only one path. Okay. Now, before you get caught up in, oh, he's claiming there's only one path to God, that is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that this is a path that has been established. Remember, Hebrews face their past and their present and have their back to their future. And in terms of enlightenment, there is a belief that back behind them is the sea, and facing them is the desert and the wilderness. And they know that where the sun rises is where the wisdom begins, because that goes all the way back to the first story, because Hebrews are storytellers. Genesis story was passed on to son, to son, to son, to son, but also their story was passed on to son, his story was passed on to son, etc. So there's lore and there is culture behind that lore, an explanation as to why, right? But all that's in front, the future behind them, because why? They're not facing the future. The future does not exist because they can't see it, right? So in terms of a path, it would have to be one that they know and are walking down with an understanding of how to go from point A to point B. It is not something where they are exploring. That's a very different situation, and I can explain that, but let's get back to our illustration. So this path, as they're moving along, let's go ahead and put a dude in here, and maybe a lady as well. So here's a dude walking along here. Then here's a lady walking along here. That way ladies don't feel left out in this information. So we're moving down the path, right? And the way that you want to think about this is one moving down the path. One moving down the path. Now, here is point A, and here is point B. And along the way is something called a thorn, okay? Something called a thorn. And this particular thorn, I know that doesn't look like a thorn, but that is actually the proper illustration of a thorn in ancient pictographic Hebrew. Actually, it's one thing I need to do to it. I need to lay it more on its side. Okay, now this is a thorn. We'll go ahead and label that as a thorn. And that particular thorn is actually, interestingly enough, something that would cause the person, when they're going down the path, to do a let's see, what are these here? Well, let's use this. Let's use this right here, and we will say, let's go ahead and use yellow for that. U-turn, right? Actually, you know what? Let's do it this way. Let's do it like, let's do a fatter pin here real quick. Sorry, just need to really illustrate this correctly for you. So this is going to be U. And then let's reduce that pin just a smidge. And then we'll say turn. So thorn is a cause, right? U-turn is the effect. So we're going to kind of create a little bit of a cycle here. So basically, thorn leads to U-turn. Why? Because the thorn is adversity, okay? Adversity. In fact, let's go ahead and sub-label this. Adversity, okay? Adversity. But here's the interesting thing about it is that particular U-turn prevents you from walking down the only path available, which means you can't make your trip, okay? Now, here's the interesting thing about it. The word turn in Hebrew is actually the drawing of the top of a container or basket, and they always used kind of a cross bracing on baskets when they would weave, and so that's why they have this. And we could even get a little bit more complex with it, but that's basically the principle, is that this is a basket, okay? But very specifically, this is turn, right? Oops. Okay. Now, a seed or a sprout, which looks like this, is actually to continue, right? And let me explain what we're talking about here in continue. Continue means to repeat. Let me explain. Let me illustrate. When you plant a seed, you have obtained that seed from a plant that already grew. And when you plant that seed, a new plant comes out. And so in the Hebrew mindset of the ancient pictographic Hebrew letters, a seed sprout is actually proof of the next generation and therefore is a continuance. Okay. All right. So now what I want you to think about is the principle of how this actually would work, because now what we have is the idea that the basket, right, is turned. I'll just put this in parentheses so you remember it's a basket. It's the top of a basket. Top of a basket. And continue is a seed sprout. Okay. And so in the Hebrew mindset, this is important. There is a seed sprout. Now, what's interesting is that the thorn catches. In fact, this is the pictograph, so we're just going to label it catch, right? Or grasp, right? And so the premise is that the thorn catches the leg of the person or whatever, and they can't walk through because there's a briar patch or whatever. Well, in the context of everything, this is actually the letter S. And so what I need to do here is I need to actually, let's see, we're going to go and we're going to label it this way. Let's use this one. So we're going to label it this way. We are going to go like this. No, actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and we'll go to another screen. So the first letter in that set was the thorn, right? The second letter in that set was the basket. And the third letter in that set was the seed sprout. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this is actually one of those words that once you know it, you can't unlearn it, right? And it goes something like this. Hard T and an N, not the nasal N, but the regular N. And of course, we can just fill in the soundings here. Okay, and so now if we were to flip that into Merkin, it would look like this. Okay, so going back to our illustration here, we understand that what causes the U-turn is actually that word Satan, okay? But if we go back over here, something interesting occurs, and that is that this is not a name, not a name, okay? It's not. It is not a title, not a title. It is a verb. Okay? So I want you to understand, I'm about to prove this to you, but I want you to understand that the idea here is that the context or the concept of Satan as a process concerning this path is one that contains information. Okay? So you're moving down a path. Work with me here. You're moving down a path, and there's this thing that you encounter that is adversarial, right? And creates adversity. Okay? And adversity is actually a resistance of you moving down the path. Now, a lot of people don't know this, But science in general actually is able to only measure something if there's some sort of resistance, whether it be in chemistry, quantum mechanics, physics, any of the other sciences, including psychology. Only resistance creates information. Okay? Which means what? Let's pause for a minute and let's get back to a cleaner board here. Which means that Satan is not an entity out to destroy you. Now, I know there's that discussion about the enemy goes about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, right? And the enemy seeks to kill, steal, and destroy. But you don't understand those words. And remember that we are working with Greek translation to English and not Hebrew, even though one particular individual, Yeshua HaMashiach, spoke Hebrew. Okay. Now, what's really important about this is that that changes a lot of contexts, because then we have pictographs to tell us the story, just like the thorn that causes the continual turning. Okay. The thorn that causes the continual turning. What a story about the adversary. Now, where this becomes important is to try to understand how this is important to the path in the Hebrew mindset. Remember, they already know the line from A to B. That's important. They won't walk down a path they don't know, right? Now, there's exceptions to that, and that requires leadership, but that's another story altogether. And when you start to get into leadership, you start to find out that most of the time, leaders will bring you into the unknown. Okay? I once worked for a company, and they were basically a local company in town. And over time, we began to basically realize that we had the capability of something more. Well, there was a necessity for somebody to take the lead and bring that company into a statewide company instead of a local company. That required proper leadership. Now, that's another story. We need to work with something a little bit different today, and that is, remember, we're working with signal. Now, it is very important to understand that when we're working with the word Satan, it is not a name. Say this to yourself. It is not a name. Okay? It is not the name of the adversary. It means adversary, but not as a noun, and therefore it is not a title. Tell yourself, it is not a title. It is a verb. It is an action, and it has purpose. Tell yourself, it is a verb, and it is an action, and it has purpose. Now, what we do as Christians is, as soon as we see this, right? As soon as we see this, we have an ever-living fit. We become terrified. We become totally, there are people who think that I have practiced witchcraft, and therefore they completely have withdrawn themselves from my life. When truth be told is there's only one thing that they were supposed to do, and truth be told is, if you accept that the gloss in John chapter 8 is not a gloss, then you accept that it is he without sin who cast the first stone. And the intrigue is that Torah says that the one who makes the accusation is the one who casts the first stone. And so here's the intrigue. You would accuse somebody of witchcraft, but you would not cast the stone. That's Lashon Hara. Because if you're not willing to execute the judgment, then you actually are not allowed to speak the judgment. But here's the intrigue. They stop talking to me. They stop communicating with me. They treat me as if I am evil. Now here's the intrigue. Out of fear. Because their bowl is so hyper-focused that they don't understand the power behind this mechanism. They don't understand the purpose behind this mechanism. I'll get rid of this because I know some of you are just going to have a fit if I leave it up there. I'm not afraid of that thing. Now, part of the reasons I'm not afraid of that thing is because I was a Satanist and I understand that symbol better, but I can tell you, Christians are terrified of it. Jews don't care. They're like, these weird Christians, what do they got going on with this devil stuff? They don't understand the devil, right? And atheists are like, guys, you got some mental stuff going on with the devil thing, right? But what we have failed to do is understand what Yahweh said to Job. He asked him, he said, were you there when I told the sea how far it could go? Now remember, now here's the thing. We don't know whether or not Job was a Hebrew because he appears to be of Edomite lineage. But what we do know is that his connection to Yahweh was stronger than anybody else's in the Bible that we could find. He's the only one who is actually able to call upon the intensification of all power in the universe. I'm sorry, not call upon, call out the intensification of all power in the universe enough that the intensification of all power in the universe showed up, right? There's a lot to be said about Job. But he says, were you there when I told the sea how far it could go? Where's the sea? Back there, right? In other words, he decides how far that future is allowed to go. But there's something even more important about this concept, and it's within the Satan mechanism, okay? Because one of the things you need to remember is that the Satan mechanism is actually something that has to do with resistance. Okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and get this off the board because I know you guys are absolutely terrified of it. Let's take a look at our bowls without all the scribble because I know that this particular board got a little bit too messy for you and I'm sure you're probably a little bit overwhelmed. So let's dummy it down a little bit. Let's come over here and let's do this again. So we will go ahead and go big here, right? We're going to go probably here, like this. And then the next one down would probably be, let's go blue. And the next one down would probably be green. We'll go green. Oh, that's not right. Sorry. There we go. And the next one down will probably be yellow. Remember, yellow is our reality. And the next one down from that. Oh, I used that green. I shouldn't use that green. Let me go ahead and stay consistent here. Don't want to lose one, especially if you guys are using colored markers. I don't know what you guys take notes with, but it would be important. Okay, so the principle is in the next color, of course, was our fear, right? There's our fear. Okay, so the way that I want you to think about this is that first and foremost, and this is important, is that you don't think about things correctly. And let me show you what I mean by that. And that is, and I'm just going to go ahead and try to illustrate this best I can, but it's going to be hard to do. Yeah. Yep. And then across. Okay. And so the way that I want you to think about this is that there is what we would call a lateral threshold. In fact, you know what? Let me do it this way so we can label these. That would be great. That would be a really good plan. We'll do it this way. Okay, so what we have here is we have this color, which is a lateral threshold. Okay, so we illustrate this lateral threshold. Let's go ahead and we'll use green here. Okay, and then we have our vertical threshold. Okay, and then I need to do something else. And that is and the reason I need to do this is actually you know what, I'm not going to do that. If I do that, it's going to get really scribbly again. So now we have our bowls, right? And we know, let's label 3 of them. Oops. Let's label 3 of them. This is, let's go, what is known about what can't, whoops, be seen. Okay. Then we'll go ahead and we will label this one what is known about, gosh, this, about what can, can't, can be seen. Okay. All right. Then finally, we have something else. Finally, we have what is not known. Because we choose not to know it. Okay. So we have a lateral threshold, we have a vertical threshold, we have what is known about what it can't be seen, and what is known about what can be seen, and then what is not known because we choose not to know it. Okay. Now, this little green bowl can be considered addictions. It can be considered fear. It can be considered anything that prevents you from ever crossing a vertical threshold into the supernatural because your soul is just above that threshold. And there's this huge gap between that threshold and this threshold. So you actually have to get past this threshold first. Now, what you need to know is that what the reason the green bowl exists, and I will go ahead and label that over here, I will say the green bowl exists not present. Okay. Now we could get into all this. We could say it's wounds, we could say it's limiting beliefs, we could say it's entitlements, but whatever it is, you are not present because being present is being in the realm of height, width, depth, time in your circle of influence. And let's say not present to your circle of influence. Oh, got all crazy there, didn't I? It's all right. One of these days, I will learn how to write on this board. Let me tell you. In Okay, good enough. Okay, not present to your circle of influence. Now, what you need to know is that while you are walking down the path in the green bowl, you are being met with pressure. Okay. So now let me illustrate pressure. Let's see, what colors do I have left here to use? How about we use, yeah, you know what? I'm just, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create these purple boundaries on these bowls. Okay. So the principle is that the yellow pressure is pushing on the threshold, and this is a very interesting threshold, the threshold of concealment. Okay. So in order for a person, and see, this is where it gets powerful. Let me go ahead and move to another one here, and we'll go big again. We'll go microcosmic for a moment instead of macrocosmic. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and illustrate these two bowls, and really kind of talk about them. So I'll go ahead and I'll create the thresholds the way that they were. We have our lateral, we have our vertical, or I'm sorry, we have our lateral, we have our vertical. Okay. And so what I want you to think about is that the bowl of reality is actually pushing against the threshold of this green bowl. And it's interesting because what that's doing is it's actually preventing anything from happening. So everything that's happening is only happening within this green bowl. And what we'll go ahead and do is call this, we're going to finally label this appropriately. We're going to actually label this, actually, no, let's not use that color. Let's use red. Because what you need to realize is that that limitation is actually going to prevent further lateral movement. Okay. Limitation is going to create or prevent further lateral movement. And I'll just put right in here prevents movement. Okay. So the way that I want you to think about this is that um, there is actually something blocking the path, right? Okay, now I need to show you a verse because I think if I don't show you this verse, you are gonna go gaga mad at me for saying what I'm about to say. So I'm gonna prove it to you with information and very specifically, we are going to be looking at we're going to be looking at an angel number, numbers 22:22. Okay, so here we are, numbers 22:22, NASB 995. But God was angry because he was going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. Now he was riding on his donkey, and his two servants were with him. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, the donkey turned off from the way and went into the field. But Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back on into the way. Okay? Then the angel of Yahweh stood in a narrow path of the vineyards with the wall on this side and the wall on that side. When the donkey saw the angel, she pressed herself to the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall, so he struck her again. The angel went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn to the right or the hand or the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she laid down under Balaam. So Balaam was angry and struck the donkey with his stick. And Yahweh opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" Then Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you have made a mockery of me. If there had been a sword in my hand, I would have killed you by now." The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I ever been accustomed to do so to you?" And he said, "No." Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed all the way to the ground. Then the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out as an adversary because your way was contrary, right, to me." Now, before we go any further, I want to talk to you a minute about the angel of the Lord. When we think in terms of agency, for example, let's say that you are in a medical situation, maybe you have a terminal illness, and you want to make sure that your family doesn't do things like, for example, leave you on life support for 9 years. You get a durable medical power of attorney, and you grant somebody the power to turn off the switch and state to them in what's called a living will that that's what you want to do. Okay, that person now becomes an agent of your life, having the power to remove your life, okay? So I want you to understand, when it comes to agency, you're empowering someone to represent you while you can't represent yourself, okay? That's what the angel of the Lord is. And you need to understand it has the same authority, capacity, and power as Yahweh. And it is important that you know that in every instance, Yahweh speaks to the person in first person as the angel of the Lord. And so when we study and see the angel of the Lord in scripture, we're actually working with Yahweh as an agent. Okay. Now, I know that's difficult for a lot of you because you really, really have God in a box and you want him to be a certain way. You got this old man with a beard sitting on the throne looking down, at earth from someplace above the earth. And, here's his son right with him, on his side, some dude with holes in his hands looking down on the earth. And then there's some weird cloudy thing next to him, and that's your Trinity, right? But the problem is that the angel of the Lord is a fourth person of the Trinity. You cannot take the angel of the Lord for granted, and you cannot say the angel of the Lord is not Yahweh. It's a version of Yahweh being in a certain operation. Meaning, if I were to really break your brain, you might have a hard time keeping those three men, or two men in a cloud, as some of you illustrate it, on thrones above the earth. Okay? So here we go. Let's break your brain. So the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I've come out as an adversary because of your way was contrary to me." Contrary to who? The angel of the Lord or Yahweh, right? Let's take a look here. Reckless is the word that's given. Oh, but you know what? We really just need to go here. We need to go into the Hebrew. And what we really need to do is we need to go over here and look at the word adversary. And it is that's right. And here is the verb: to be or act as an adversary, to resist or oppose. So now, my friends, here is Yahweh as a certain modality as the angel of the Lord in full capacity, authority, and the ability to act as Satan. So now, when I present this to you, you will better understand the importance, okay? So now let's go back to the board and let's take a look at our illustration. So first of all, you need to understand that in this particular situation, this limitation, which could be addiction, could be fear, it could be a number of things, but basically what it has done is disassociated the person from family. And we'll leave them red because you know what? I'm going to explain what they are to the person. From friends, from your job, from religion. You say, why do you put religion in there? Well, I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I put religion in there is because you need to remember what is disassociated from out here, right? I mean, and I'll just go ahead and put that. I'll just go ahead and put that particular thing in here. Remember, this is that supernatural element. Okay. So my point is that if your soul, which is basically kind of your cell phone connection to let's see how we want to label. So I guess I want to use this because it's sort of a threshold. This is your cell phone connection um, to this purple bowl. Okay, so we're just going to say Wi-Fi here, as it were. And so the principle is that you would have to cross through this threshold before you would, I'm sorry, not that threshold. You have to cross over this threshold before you could ever cross over this threshold, which means that fear, addiction, and let's just say etc. Actually, you know what? I don't want to put etc. What I want to do is say fear, addiction, wounds, limiting beliefs. Okay. Let's see, fear, addiction, wounds, limiting beliefs, and entitlements, which has two issues with it. Okay. All right. So now what you need to realize is how this actually works, because one of the things that's going to be really hard here to know is that what has actually happened to friends, to family, to religion, is it has actually become the pressure upon this green bowl. Okay? So the pressure upon that green bowl is actually reality working against this construct. And by the way, this is a construct. Okay? You created it. You created the concealment. You lost sight, right? Not of the bigger picture. Yet the bigger picture is completely out of question. You can't even remotely try to connect. You're like, oh man, I can't connect with God, or I don't feel God, or God's not talking to me, or I God this, or religion that, or blah blah blah. No, you don't understand. That now has, because of your decision to create the construct, become, and if you haven't guessed it by now, you know what's about to go onto the board. You know what's about to get put on here. This all right here has become an adversary to your path. Because your path right now is your addiction, is your fear, is your wounds, is your entitlements. Now, adversary has become friends, family, job, religion. Because why? You want to maintain this reality. You can no longer accept that these are a reality. And so now an adversary is pushing against that. Meaning what? There's only one way for you to reconnect with that concept, and that is that you have to push back. And what I mean by that is you have to push through that threshold that you are stuck in. You have to push through. You have to push through back into the yellow bowl. Okay? So on the outskirts of this thing, I think you understand what I'm meaning here. that you have to push against the reality that you're trying to maintain, right? You have to actually push back against the adversary. All right? You have to push back against the resistance. Now, what's really important here is for you to know that if you're going along down your path and you experience an adversary, which is just the word resistance. See, remember, all this is information, not an entity trying to destroy you. We know that because it was the angel of the Lord. That is a benevolent being. Right? Now, granted, he was going to kill Balaam, but you don't completely understand everything that is going on there in terms of what death really means to a Hebrew, etc., etc. But we'll get back to that at another day, another time. What's more important here is for you to realize that resistance only has one answer. And what's interesting is you could take all the other information here and it would actually be just noise. That's why this is so confusing. That's why what you have seen here, and of course, that's why you instantly feel fear when I put that on the board, when I spelled it backwards, when I put this on the board. You're terrified of it. But what you don't understand is all this is, if it appears in your life, is resistance. It's information. It's signal. And it's signal from the intensification of all power in the universe. I'm about to prove it to you. But what you need to realize is it is also the result of a choice that you made to conceal the rest. When you hyper-focused on that single thing, all of a sudden in your family, your friends, your community, your circle of influence, your domain is not in front of you anymore. Now, I know because I have chatted with men who were addicted to things like methamphetamines, who were alcoholics, and their families always were the enemy in their situation until they became sober and realized that their family's pushback was actually to try to help them. Okay? Now, I want you to understand, if you are in a situation where there is adversity and you don't have the ability to push back, that's a God-sized task, and that's another thing that we need to discuss. But it is very important for you to know that the blowback on these bowls is actually just a prevention from you accessing them unless you make effort. But there's more, and this is going to be very important at some point. And that is that if you're in the green bowl, let's do this one. If you're in the green bowl, you actually don't have this as your reality. You're never accessing any of this. And what you need to know, and this is important, is that there is absolutely blowback occurring here. Because you think this is your reality. You have never even touched upon the fact that this right here is actually resistance, and there is actually a vertical threshold. And what you also need to know and realize is that all of that that's going on there, which I know that got a little bit complicated. So let's go ahead and get rid of a lot of it. Because what I want you to think about is the bigger picture here. In that a construct is just something that you have labeled. Now let's talk a minute about if this particular bowl is fear. What's something that you have learned from this particular learning? It's a limitation upon you. But furthermore, the pressure of reality is trying to tell you there's another reality than the fear that you're hyper focused on. Furthermore, there's another thing that you need to know. Okay? Concealment is just unrevealed light. It says in James chapter 1 that all good gifts come down from the Father of lights. Now, what does that mean for you? That means that this pressure is actually a veil. Okay? And all you need to do is go take that veil and open the curtain. But what you don't realize is that by opening that curtain, you're accepting that there is an unknown, which requires a leader, which I said was another lesson for another day. But, and this is important, the removal of that veil and the revelation of that light will show you something shocking. So let's look at one more illustration here. Remember, I had the big bowl, and remember that I had some stuff in the bottom of it. I want you to think about that stuff for a minute. That stuff is in the bowl, right? But when we think about the bowl, we don't think about the bowl correctly because all we think about is, let's do it this way. It's actually more like down here. That. Okay. And for those of you who can't see that, because you have a cell phone or something, I'm just going to color it in. And we'll make it a little bit bigger. That is the only thing you know right now. So the way I want you to think about this is that when you cross a veil into more revealed light, you still have not seen all of it. Because the truth is that every threshold is a concealment on the next thing. Okay? Think about it. You yourself were not who you were a year ago. And if we accept, if I go ahead and I illustrate this by putting some contrast across here, then you would agree all this orange in this space right here is actually a gift. Now, for those of you For those of you who have not yet watched the cycles teaching, this might be a little bit confusing, but I want you to remember that when Yeshua said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, that means that the cyclical cycle of the 7-day rest and the seventh day process is a gift. And so I want you to think about it this way. The intensification of all power in the universe wants to bestow all of its benevolence upon an other. Okay? So the way that I want you to think about this is that this is what we would call the first vessel, or another way to put it is bride. And this is womb. And the process of a vessel coming to a realization that it is part of a bigger picture requires expansion, which is extremely uncomfortable because this space right here is actually empty and needs to be filled still. You see, when we're operating in, let me do this. We're going to break this out. Some of you will understand this because you speak in design. But we're going to break this out over here and take a look at this bowl real quick. Now, we've identified that this green bowl is a problem and not actually your reality, but the truth be told is that one of the things that you need to know is that it's not full. It's not full, and in fact, and this is crazy, here comes the crazy part, there is a Y, hold on. There is a Y behind the Y. And there is an empty space here. This may be full, but there's an empty space there. And that empty space right there is preventing any light from entering this area because our reality thinks it's here. Our mind has constructed that this is actually the bowl. So what? That means we can't even admit that it's a fear. We can't even admit that it's an addiction. We can't, because there's a why behind the why. And guess what? I could keep going with this, but I think you probably are starting to get the point here, right? I think you're probably starting to get this. Because what am I doing? Now, you need to realize there's another why behind the why. But the part you don't get, is that although there is a lot of unrevealed stuff here, like I want you to understand the true bride has all the pressure of all the different vessels pressing upon it, right? The true bride is you. You are the bride, which means what? Well, let's get rid of the noise. There shouldn't be any other noise here. You see, these concealments protect you from the reality of how far we've gone into the why behind the why. The original vessel that God wanted to bestow all of his benevolence upon, now some of that benevolence has to be concealed again and again and again and again, which means two things. Number one, God's going to meet you where you're at, but you need to realize only through pressure. And your signal that God is speaking in your life is that resistance. And the instruction is to push past it and open the veil, because that's where the abundance, that's where the answers to prayer are. That's where the justice is. That's where the home is. That's where the money is. That's where the life is. That's where the children are. That's where the job is. So you need to understand the word Satan is very inappropriately labeled by Christianity. Inappropriately labeled. It is a mechanism of Yahweh to show you that he's there. To show you that there's unrevealed light. Resistance is the only way that we know that something physically is a force in our universe. Physics is a measure of resistance. Unrevealed light is not a measure of resistance, but the resistance that prevents you from seeing that unrevealed light is an invitation for you to push through. And here's the part: if you do not have the wherewithal to push through, it is a God-sized task, which means he's not looking for your effort. He's looking for your connection and alignment. And he's going to make sure that the sea goes only as far as it can go. But you need to remember what that also means. That means that we need to press against it. Now, here's the part that's so important that people don't realize. Number one is when it says that there is always more darkness before the dawn, and there is always weeping before the morning, and the dawning of a new day brings joy, you need to understand that we always quit during the weeping. We stop putting pressure during the adversity. We stop staying in a state as a vessel ready to be expanded, ready to be impregnated, ready to become a vessel of the light, ready to become a vessel of distribution. You see, I have an issue with the people who take vows of poverty or who choose to stay in poverty. Didn't say I judged them, and I have no interest in throwing stones, but I take issue with them because they do not get the idea that the more you have, the more you can give away. They don't understand that riches are a machine, a mechanism, not the end game. Remember, Hasatan is a cause to an effect. It is designed to make you make a U-turn so that you never uncover that other light, because the only one who may pass is the one who keeps pressure upon the thresholds. In other words, if you let up, you will stay in your bowl. But if you push and push and push and push and push, you will push past that threshold, because if there's anything I know, number one, you can never be defeated. You can only be persuaded, tricked into believing that you can't push, tricked into believing that there isn't an answer to the current circumstances you're in. But one of the things I would like you to do is think about the things you've already gone through that at the time when you were going through them, you thought that was impossible. There would never be an answer, that it would never actually turn out right. It is imperative that you understand that it was never, ever the intention of the intensification of all power in the universe, even when he breathed the Torah, and eventually the Torah became flesh and dwelt among us to show us how to walk itself out. It was never the intention that you stay where you're at. But also, there is a concept. There was never the intention that there would be a destruction. It was never meant to be a freebie. This overemphasized grace within Christianity forgets the threshold, and very specifically forgets the purpose of being granted the power, the dunamis, right? The yochal that you've been granted. And not only that, but also it forgets your authority. Because what you need to realize is it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. The glory of God to conceal a matter. Let's not use that color, because that color is your own construct, which you're allowed to do because of the concept of co-authorship, which we will talk about. But the concept here is that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. All of this you don't know about. You don't know that you are the Red Bull. And I'm not talking about the drink. You don't know that you have all of this other area to work in. And guess what? This is what you need to know. And this is so important. This particular thing right here, this threshold, which we have labeled in the past as Satan, is where all, and I mean all, of your, let's use this one. Fine, we'll use that one. Tired of messing with ghosts. Where all of your abundance, your happiness, your hope, etc., dwell. In that empty space waiting to be filled, which you can't bring yourself to cross to for two reasons. I'll just show you that on the screen real quick. You can't bring yourself to cross into for two reasons. Number one, you don't want to cross into emptiness. You don't want to cross into expansion because that means you have to wait to be filled, right? Which means there could be a possibility of losing something that you think makes you happy, but also it is possible that you could lose something that you value. And you're afraid that if you cross into that realm, that's what's going to happen. But the truth is you dwelling in the realm that you're in, you have not connected to the other realms. And those other realms are the next thing. Because what you don't realize, and this is important, is that what you are working with when you are working with this particular area is the next thing. Because right here, is the purple bowl. Meaning what? If we accept that that purple bowl represented the idea of something other than normal, other than natural, it is your miracles. It is your stuff, your healings, everything. So when you experience resistance, it is the signal that there's something on the other side for you. And that requires you to trust not only the system that he put in place, the mechanism that says it was never about anything you earned. It was never about anything that you actually can do. If I have something for you to do, fine. And in fact, if I want you to use your imagination to do it, great. But it was never what you do that actually makes the supernatural exist. You arrogant human. So when you sit there and you say, oh, I'm a good person, I deserve justice, I deserve this, a person, this good person deserves this good person doesn't deserve that, you are actually operating in the fruit that you've eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil because you think that there's some merit behind the happenstance. But what you really need to glean is how this mechanism really works. Resistance is the signal. All the other stuff is fluff, noise. You're going along, you have a business, you're going along and everything's going great and you're like, man, we're doing so good and everything's amazing. And all of a sudden, bam, you hit this wall. Your books drop out. Next thing you're in the red. And all these things start happening and you're scared and worried, but you're not responding correctly. You see, truth be told is what you need to be doing is pushing back. I'm going to tell you something. Almost every single time that I have an adversity in my life, I look for my vessel. Now, I sometimes forget to do this, and those are when I go into these deep depression funks or whatever. But truth be told is almost every time that I have pushback, I find somebody to help. And the reason I do, originally back in the day, it was to retaliate, right? But that's wrong thinking. This isn't about battle. You're not battling this. In fact, it's nowhere were you instructed to battle that. You were told to resist, which is what? You become the Satan against what's pushing against this threshold. Yeah, you guys aren't ready for changing your paradigm on that word, are you? I just felt in my heart that there are people who are absolutely blown away that I just told them they need to become Satan. And told them that their God is Satan. Told them that Yahweh stood as Satan against Balaam. I get it. But if you can grasp it as information and not a title and not a name, and as an ancient pictographic story of the Hebrew on the path in the desert and encountering a briar patch. And let me tell you, I went on a hike once recently, within the last 2 years, and I had this inclination that I wanted to go up the mountain towards this particular spot that I was wanting to get to, and literally along the path the whole way were rose bushes. And it was so bad that you could not cross off of the path in that direction at all. It was as if somebody had just planted rose bushes all along the path, and you literally could not go up that mountain at all. And they were wild roses, so half of them just had hips and not actually bulbs. But the interesting thing about it was I had scrapes all over my legs from times where while I was walking, it had caught my leg. And I thought to myself, that is absolutely the illustration of Satan. as I was doing that hike. And I wasn't intentionally catching them on my legs. I was looking at other things and it would catch me. Signal. I was looking at the noise. Look at the beautiful clouds on the mountain there while I'm walking down the path and oh man, geez. And I'm bleeding, right? Satan. But signal, letting me know what? That there is an adversity, there's resistance. Resistance is a measurement, and therefore resistance is indicative of a necessity for you to keep pressure upon it. You pray without ceasing. You keep continuing to do what you can do. You make the phone calls. You do the follow-up. It might be terrifying. You might be like, you know what? There's no way that I can make this phone call. There's no way that I could write this letter. There's no way that I could do these things. Push past it. Because truth be told, it's a message from your creator that there's something amazing on the other side, that he wants to expand your vessel, that he wants to actually give you something more than what you've ever had. And if you think for a moment that I'm trying to push some positive thinking prosperity thing, I just told you that the negative is actually the information. And so what you need to accept is, like, when you start to feel a certain way, you need to accept that what's on the other side is actually for you. Now, this is the part where we need to discuss time. You can hasten this by keeping pressure on it. One thing I have learned about God is that he will definitely do the thing. It's just there's a timing for it. How do we hasten it? By keeping pressure on it. Does that mean we get impatient? See, and that's where you miss the bus. That's where you're too busy on your cell phone and somebody says something really profound and important to you and you don't listen and you say, and you never got it. Because you're paying attention to the noise and not the signal and not the information. Your family, your friends, your job, your religion is all crying out to you to stop hyper-focusing on fear, get out of your addictions, get out of your wounds, get out of your limiting beliefs, your entitlements, get out of your arrogance, get out of the things that are preventing you from having a full life. Because before you ever touch upon heaven, you ever touch upon the supernatural, upon healing, upon miracles, upon abundance, upon all the other things, you need to reconnect with the souls that are in your circle of influence. And you definitely need to be in a state of light with them, pressing against the darkness, because all the darkness is a deception. There's no darkness, just an absence of light. But what you don't realize is that's because there's an object blocking it. You push that object, and lo and behold, there's light. And I have seen this in my own life so many times, over and over and over again. But I want you to understand, when you grasp the bigger picture, that you are the Red Bull. You are the bride. You are that special, treasured people. You are the royal priesthood and the holy nation. You are the promise of the gospel. Go watch the video from last week. But the premise is, and this is important, maybe it was not last week, it is very important that you remember that your circle of influence expands over time as you continue to what? Uncover the light, as you continue to push against the threshold. And I will remind you that when you push against this threshold, you get slingshotted into that new season. And I want to remind you another thing. That season pursues you. Part of the pressure, part of the Hasatan blocking your path from continuing down this mess that you're in is that season. There's a knowing it's coming. And what's crazy is you need to remember weeping may endure for the night. If you continue to weep, there will never be a morning. You have to press against the weeping. You have to press against the dawn to bring the dawn, to hasten the dawn. You say, oh, this is earning salvation. No, it isn't. You don't even understand what a salvation is. And if you did, you would understand how powerful this message really is. You say, oh, this is about works. Okay, I'll tell you what. If you really think that you can do something to accomplish this, go ahead and give me a call. Give me information that I don't have yet. Because my understanding is that the only way to accomplish this is to tap into something that's on the other side of it. Meaning what? You need to begin to draw the energy from the other side of the threshold to yourself already. Yeshua said, if you request something from me, believe you have received it. Meaning what? Draw upon the energy of it before it ever even arrives. This is interesting because this goes into NLP and future pacing, which is the idea of actually helping someone experience the emotion of that moment when they arrive at it before they arrive at it so that it becomes an intuition within their lives. And the interesting thing about it is that's exactly what Yeshua said. Believe you have received it. Experience the emotion of that moment, and it will be yours. So when you draw upon a wound, oh, this thing happened to me back in 1997, blah, 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 blah. You know what? Green Bowl. Which means what? Your children, your spouse, your mother, your father, your life are all adversaries because they're asserting that they want you as a person to be full in everything. A lot of people don't realize that when they're in their state of self-loathing and in their state of selfishness and in their state of doing their own thing like an addiction, that the people in their lives who benefit from them actually want them to be okay so that they can experience the fullness of who they are. Which means you have an obligation to cross the threshold for the sake of those who believe in you, even though you don't believe in yourself. And if there's a potential in you, and if there's a season calling you, and if there's a purpose calling you, then you ought to probably pay close attention to the fact that that season and that purpose and that person are the benevolence of God, pressing against your attempt to create a false reality. And let me tell you, if you don't believe me, you need to think about the times when you have tried to control your environment and where the pushback came from. Did the pushback come from your enemies or did it come from your loved ones? When you tried to control your environment, when you made the rule or you set the boundary, oh, you know what? Don't ever say that to me. My ex-husband used to say that to me. Who was pushing against it? Your current spouse, right? And he's like, what are you talking about? I use that word all the time. What's wrong with it? You take it personal, go, oh, you know what? You can't use that word. It drives me crazy. And your spouse is like, that's my normal speech. What are you doing? You're controlling your environment. You just created that vessel. You just created that bowl. You just created that green bowl. And what you don't know is now your spouse is Hasatan, pushing against that thing that Yahweh wanted to remove in the first place, because he wants you here. He wants you here. And he's having to deal with you here. That is the significance of thresholds and of pressure and of resistance. Meaning, let's say that you have a crank and your job is to continue spinning this crank. And in your mind, your arms are getting fatigued. And in your mind, you're like, oh man, I can't wait for my shift to end. And I'm spinning this crank. And oh man, I just can't keep going. I'm getting tired. I'm getting exhausted. Oh, I gotta slow down a little bit. Let me see. And all of a sudden you stop and the earth breaks apart. Because what you didn't know is that your purpose was to hold it together by turning the crank. You just got to keep the pressure on. You just got to continue. Now, I know this sounds cliche. Oh, just put your head down and plow through that adversity. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you need to realize how the mechanism is actually telling you that a season is coming. It's a measurement. Resistance is always a measurement. It will always tell us, what is not present that should be present. So you see, the principle is that all the potential is on the other side of that threshold. Take, for example, a catapult. So you crank the catapult back, right? Let's illustrate it really quick. So you have this catapult, right? Let's go ahead and go on the board here. I don't want to use this color. This color's dumb. For illustrating wood and stuff. Okay, so we have this catapult here, right? And so the principle is that you have this this balance part here in the middle that's called the stop, and then you have some sort of tension here, and you have a arm going back, and you have a basket for the payload here. And the principle is that you put, watch this now, you put pressure upon the catapult in order to set the hook, right? So there's a hook right here, and you set it, and you hook it, right? That pressure then is held back by this limitation, right? When you have not fired that catapult, it is 100%, and I'll go ahead, and what I'll do is I'll illustrate it in its locked position, right? So now the catapult is in its locked position right here, and it's hooked. There's a basket, okay? It has all this potential to fire, right? But that is potential energy. It has not happened yet. You release the hook, and all of a sudden, it fires, right? If you do not push back on the catapult that's already spring loaded, it will never fire. It's that same principle. You need to keep constant pressure upon any resistance that you experience. It is definitely prayer. Because why? Because there is definitely something bigger than us who knows more than us and can guide us. Now, that would require some connection to the soul, which means you probably have to really work on that little green bowl. But the other part of this is that it is also action. And truth be told, is prayer itself is action. It's just a very different kind. I have experienced when someone was praying for me an extraordinary amount of energy before, a feeling of love when they were fighting for me and praying for me. And I could tell you that the experience was such that I was shocked by the fact that I knew they were fighting for me. I could feel that tension in the environment. But truth be told is that all I could feel or experience, I should say, was this strong feeling of love. And it was kind of a shock to my whole entire thinking because when would you feel love like that if someone was fighting, right? There's aggression there, there's agitation, there's tension. That is the power behind this, is that you're tapping into an energy outside of yourself in that process of moving forward. So it's not just about pushing through the adversity. We've all known that. We've overcome, right? We've overcome the breakup. We've overcome the bad experience. We've overcome the stupid mistakes, right? But pushing against it is a new understanding that what's waiting on the other side is not just relief, but something even greater. And that's the key here. So this, I hope, has been a really good illustration and a really good mind wrecker and a really good restructuring of thinking about how things work within our universe based upon the concept of physics. Within physics, the way that we're able to measure things is by the resistance that occurs, the stress or the strain, okay? The forces that act upon something create stress or strain, and that's what we can measure. For example, when you step a foot onto a scale, you are actually putting stress upon a spring that resists you at a certain amount that would give you an indication of how much you actually weigh based upon calculations they did a long time ago on how strong to make that spring. And so what I want you to think about is that your weight is measured by the amount of pressure you're pushing against the resistance. Okay? All right. Well, I think I've made my point on this. And I think you understand better the difference between signal and noise. And I think you understand also that that green bowl is a difficult reality that you need to accept doesn't belong. And I'm going to actually propose to you that until you go outside of that green bowl, your family, your friends, your job, your religion, your psyche itself is your adversary. And adversity itself is letting you know that it's time to push back that, because a season is coming, a season of abundance, of hope, of expansion. And that means he who is trusted with little is given much, right? If you choose to stay in your bowl, I'm going to tell you a secret. You will confine yourself to a smaller bowl. And the things that actually in the beginning were answers in that green bowl will become the adversary pushing against and concealing even that. And you do not want to know what happens when that goes there. But I can tell you that it is where you begin to lose everything. So be aware that it is your job to push against the threshold. Now, what special instruction have I given you? Once you're in the yellow bowl, it's time to push against the threshold of the purple bowl. And if you ever attain to the purple bowl, which you should probably let me know, it's time to push against that other bowl and see what's out there. So you see, it's not about you. It's more about everything else around you, because the you that you actually are, that you don't know you are, can't know you are, and don't believe you are, is actually the intensification of all power in the universe dialed back. You are him. You are Yahweh. And here's the intrigue. That means that you can do Yahweh things. And what's amazing about that is that once we move into those other thresholds and get past those places and are in those bigger bowls, things change for humanity. And we don't have to do or go through the things that we think are inevitable, like the book of Revelation. Book of Revelation is a warning. It is not inevitable. But if you continue to stay in the green bowl, and the next guy next to you stays in the green bowl, and the next guy next to you stays in the green bowl, there will never be a red bowl. There will never be a bride. So, keep pressure on the adversity. Do not let the Satan turn you around from your path. Okay? Shabbat Shalom.